My name is Aziza Caldwell, born Monroe, daughter of a seamstress and a jazzman from Oakland. I've spent most of my 68 years learning the art of staying composed, even when the world tilts beneath my feet. But nothing in all those years prepared me for the sentence my son spoke on a golden afternoon inside my late husband's study. "Mom, the company's been sold. Your share is $23,000. $23,000. After 45 years of sweat, sacrifice, and late-night prayers whispered beside the man who built Caldwell Aerosystems from a rented garage. I remember the faint hum of Langston's old record player, still looping Coltrane's Naima. The scent of sandalwood lingering like memory, and Dorian's voice cutting through it all. Cool, practiced, rehearsed. I didn't flinch, not then. But inside, something ancient and defiant stirred awake. If you've ever had your worth measured in someone else's numbers, keep listening. Because this isn't a story about money. It's about legacy, betrayal, and the quiet power of a woman who refuses to be written out of her own story. I stared at Dorian, my only son, standing there in his tailored suit like he'd been born to power instead of raised on grit. The way he said it, Monarch Crest Holdings made the acquisition. Mom, it's a good deal. As if good could explain betrayal. I asked, careful to keep my voice level, and who exactly runs Monarch Crest? He adjusted his cufflinks, the gold ones his father gave him when he took over as CEO, and replied, A.E. Monroe, some investor group out of San Francisco. They specialize in mid-size manufacturing takeovers. Monroe, my maiden name. I repeated it slowly, tasting its familiarity, letting it hang in the air between us. He didn't notice. He was too busy explaining market conditions, liabilities, tax advantages. Language meant to sound like logic, but built to hide guilt. Outside, the California sun cut through the blinds, slicing the room into bars of light and shadow. I watched those shadows crawl across his face, and wondered when ambition had replaced decency. He had no idea that while he was talking, I was already remembering a conversation Langston and I had before he died, his voice low, urgent. Aziza, if something happens to me, trust your instincts. Protect what we built. Sevens. When Dorian left that evening, I stayed in Langston's study long after the house fell silent. The old desk, carved from mahogany, still held the warmth of his hands in its grain. I traced it slowly, the way I used to trace his wedding band, when the world outside our little empire felt too heavy. Then, I opened the drawer he'd once told me was for emergencies only. The key had hung on my charm bracelet for decades, a secret I never questioned. Until now. Inside lay a leather portfolio stamped with a gold crest. Monarch Crest Holdings. I pulled the documents free, heart pounding steady and cold. Articles of incorporation, tax filings, bank records, every line bearing the same signature. Mine. Aziza E. Monroe. The name I hadn't used since the day I became a Caldwell. Months before Langston's stroke, he'd urged me to secure what he feared might be taken. Together, we built Monarch Crest in silence, layer by layer, a fortress disguised as opportunity. Now I understood why. My son had sold his father's company, back to me, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. I sat back in Langston's chair, the one upholstered in worn oxblood leather, and let the truth settle like dust in the late light. The man I loved had trusted me with more than memories. He had handed me a weapon wrapped in foresight. All those years he'd called me his steady compass. I never realized he'd been quietly charting an escape route from our own son's greed. On the desk sat a photograph. Langston in his lab coat, me beside him holding the first prototype we ever built. We had dreamed of legacy, not war. Yet here I was, the widow of a visionary and the mother of a betrayer, holding the papers that could undo him. The ache in my chest wasn't just heartbreak, it was awakening. I could hear Langston's voice again, that deep, deliberate calm. Don't fight loud, Aziza. Fight smart. Sevens. The next morning, as dawn broke over California City, my phone buzzed with a familiar name. Reggie Hollis. He didn't ask if I was ready. He just said, "It's time." And I realized it truly was. Reggie Hollis had the kind of office that looked like it had nothing to hide. Floor-to-ceiling glass, steel angles, and a view of downtown California City that made you feel small and powerful all at once. He'd been Langston's lawyer for over 30 years, and my quiet friend even longer. The moment I walked in, he didn't bother with condolences. He simply pushed a cup of chamomile tea across the table and said, "You're here because you already know." I nodded. There was no point pretending otherwise. On the screen before us, the numbers told the story Dorian never meant for me to see. False liabilities, pension withdrawals, offshore transfers. My son hadn't just sold the company. He'd hollowed it out from within, draining its core while smiling in quarterly reports. Langston had suspected it before his stroke. Reggie confirmed every detail now. "He underestimated you," Reggie said softly. "He thought you'd mourn and move on." Sevens. I studied the digital spreadsheet glowing cold against the glass table. Each figure felt like a wound, but also a map. Monarch Crest Holdings wasn't just a shield anymore. It was a doorway back into the empire Langston built. "We move quietly," I told him. "We let him think the sale is clean until I walk into that boardroom myself." Reggie smiled faintly, a mixture of admiration and warning. "Aziza, this isn't just business. This is blood." Sevens. "I know," I said, hearing the steel in my own voice. "And I intend to make it right. With the law, not revenge." He leaned back, eyes narrowing with something like respect. "Then I'll have the paperwork ready for Friday. Once they see who's really behind Monarch Crest, the tables will turn." Sevens. That same afternoon, the echo of Reggie's words still lingered when I heard Dorian's car pull into the driveway. The low growl of that imported engine had become his signature long before the company belonged to him. He stepped inside without knocking, smelling of cologne and confidence, and behind him came a woman I didn't recognize. Sharp suit, sharper smile. "Mom," he said, tone smooth as oil. "This is Ava Sterling. She's handling the listing for the house." Sevens. Listing. The word hit like a slap. I blinked once, then twice, pretending to misunderstand. Listing. As in selling? Ava nodded politely, holding out manicured fingers. "Mr. Caldwell mentioned you'd already agreed. The property market's strong right now. Perfect timing." Dorian stood there, hands in pockets, posture casual, but his eyes flickered. "It's too big for you now, Mom. Maintenance, taxes, memories. You deserve someplace easier." Sevens. He wanted to sell the only home Langston and I ever shared, the place where we built both a company and a life. I walked to the desk, unlocked the drawer with a small silver key, and pulled out a leather-bound document sealed with Langston's initials. "Your father anticipated this," I said evenly, laying the will flat between us. Clause 16, subsection 3. No real property may be sold without my written consent. Sevens. For the first time, Dorian's charm cracked. He reached for the papers, but I placed my hand over them, firm as stone. "You can't override integrity with convenience," I said quietly. Ava shifted uncomfortably beside him. Dorian exhaled, the sound part irritation, part disbelief. "You've been talking to Reggie, haven't you?" Sevens. I smiled, the kind that comes from knowing the ground beneath you is steady again. "No, Dorian. I've been listening to your father." Sevens. The night after that confrontation, I was sitting by the kitchen window when my phone buzzed. A message from Malik Turner, head of engineering. He had worked with Langston since the first prototype days, back when our payroll fit on a yellow notepad. His text was short, deliberate. "Mrs. Caldwell, something's wrong with the data transfer order. Can we talk?" Sevens. Within the hour, Malik was in Langston's study, his posture respectful but tense. "Yesterday," he began, "Dorian sent a directive to move all design blueprints and proprietary data to a new secure server by end of week. Only, this new server isn't one of ours. The encryption's minimal. It's like leaving the front door open and handing someone the keys." I could see the frustration in his eyes, the quiet disbelief of a man watching the company he believed in, being stripped of its soul. I asked how long we had before the transfer completed. 2 days, he said. "I've already told my team the system's incompatible." That buys us time, but he'll start asking questions soon. I nodded slowly, already seeing the picture form. The sale was just the beginning. Dorian planned to drain the company's true value. The innovations, the intellectual property Langston spent a lifetime perfecting. "Thank you, Malik," I said, meeting his gaze. "From now on, you report only to me." He hesitated, then asked, "Does that mean—" I cut him off gently. "It means I own Monarch Crest. And until this is over, we protect what Langston built, no matter the cost." Sevens, Malik exhaled, half in relief, half in awe. "Then you've got every engineer in this building on your side, ma'am." Sevens. By Thursday night, California City hummed with its usual noise. Sirens, laughter from a nearby bar, the rhythm of a city that didn't care whose life was unraveling behind closed doors. I sat alone in the dim light of Langston's study, reviewing Reggie's updates while the clock ticked toward midnight. The plan was set. Tomorrow's board meeting would decide everything. Dorian thought he'd be introducing the mysterious investors from Monarch Crest Holdings, shaking hands, and basking in his own brilliance. Instead, he'd be standing face to face with the woman he'd underestimated his whole life. Reggie had arranged everything. The legal filings, the ownership certificates, the financial evidence that tied Dorian to every falsified document. All that remained was my resolve. I could almost hear Langston's voice echo through the room, calm and sure. "Don't let anger cloud your aim, Aziza. Justice is quieter than revenge." I ran my hand over the leather folder bearing the Monarch Crest, feeling its weight. Beneath the gold embossing was not just power, it was proof. A soft knock startled me. It was Reggie himself, looking tired but satisfied. "We're ready," he said simply. "Security will open the building at 6:15. I'll meet you in the lobby." I nodded, grateful for his steadiness. As he left, I glanced at Langston's photograph one last time. "We started this together," I whispered. "I'll finish it the same way, head held high." Sevens. At dawn, the skyline burned gold over the glass tower of Caldwell Aerosystems, and I walked through its doors not as the widow they pitied, but as the storm they never saw coming. The city was still half asleep when I arrived at Caldwell Aerosystems that Friday morning. The sky over California City burned with that early amber glow that always made Langston call it creation light. It was the kind of light that made you believe anything could begin again. I stepped out of Reggie's car, heels clicking against the marble entryway, my reflection rising up in the glass facade like a woman reborn. The night security guard blinked in surprise when I greeted him by name. "Morning, Mrs. Caldwell," he stammered. "Didn't expect you this early." I smiled. "That's the point, George." Sevens. Up on the 15th floor, Reggie was already setting the stage. The boardroom was a monument to Langston's taste. Polished mahogany, framed aerospace patents, the company crest gleaming beneath recessed lighting. At the head of the table sat Langston's chair, untouched since his stroke. Reggie gestured toward it. "You should sit there," he said. For a moment, my throat tightened. That chair was more than furniture. It was legacy, responsibility, love. I lowered myself into it slowly, feeling the faint creak of leather, as if the room itself exhaled. We laid out the documents. Monarch Crest incorporation papers, proof of ownership, the financial audits exposing Dorian's creative accounting, and a signed affidavit from Malik, confirming the attempted transfer of intellectual property. On Reggie's tablet, he queued up the slide that would project the numbers onto the wall, the cold truth that would strip away every illusion my son had built. At 7:30, the elevator chimed. Two of Dorian's allies, Greer and Colton, entered mid-conversation and stopped short when they saw me. Greer blinked. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is unexpected." "Good morning, gentlemen," I said evenly. "Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss before the rest arrive." Colton exchanged a wary look with Reggie. "This isn't standard protocol." "Neither is selling a family company under false pretenses," Reggie replied without looking up. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Greer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should wait for Mr. Caldwell before—" The elevator chimed again, and there he was. Dorian. My son. Perfectly pressed suit, flawless tie, every inch the polished executive he'd worked so hard to become. But his eyes, those gave him away. Surprise first, then calculation. He glanced at me, at the open folder on the table, then back again. "Mom," he said carefully, "you shouldn't be here." "Sevens. On the contrary," I answered, rising. "This is exactly where I should be." "Sevens." He gave a quick, humorless laugh. "This is a confidential meeting." "It is," I said. "And as the principal owner of Monarch Crest Holdings, I believe I'm entitled to attend." "Sevens." The room froze. Dorian's composure faltered. "What?" "Sevens." I slid the embossed card across the table. Aziza E. Monroe, CEO, Monarch Crest Holdings. The initials glowed gold in the morning light. You sold Caldwell Aero Systems, I said quietly, to your mother. Sevens. The look on his face was a study in disbelief, anger, and fear, an unraveling he couldn't disguise. His hand gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. That's impossible, he said. You couldn't. Sevens. Reggie's calm voice cut in. It's not only possible, Mr. Caldwell. It's legal, documented, and binding. Your mother controls 100% of Monarch Crest's shares. Sevens. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of the air system filled the room. Then I said, You thought you were closing a deal, Dorian. What you really did was hand me back everything your father built. Sevens. The air shifted. The power, once his, now circled the room like static, alive and undeniable. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. You wanted control, son, I said softly. Now you're going to learn what real control looks like. Sevens. Dorian didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at the business card, as though the gold lettering might rearrange itself into a more forgiving truth. You're joking, he said finally, voice brittle. This is some kind of performance. Sevens. This, I said, tapping the stack of documents before me, is the truth. Reggie slid a folder toward him, calm as a surgeon. These are the incorporation papers for Monarch Crest Holdings, filed 6 months ago under the name Aziza E. Monroe. Acquisitions, valuation reports, tax filings, all legitimate. And, as you'll see, executed under the same statutes you invoked to sell the company. Sevens. Dorian's jaw clenched, the mask slipping for the first time. You've been spying on me, he accused. Manipulating me. Sevens. I met his glare without blinking. You call it manipulation. I call it preservation. You were gutting your father's life's work, bleeding it dry while pretending to protect it. Sevens. Greer and Colton looked from him to me, their alliance starting to crumble. Is this true? Colton asked, voice uncertain. Dorian exhaled sharply, trying to gather control. Gentlemen, this is my mother. She's grieving. She doesn't understand how corporate structures... Sevens. Reggie interrupted, sliding another document forward. She understands perfectly. Here are the wire transfers to your personal shell accounts in Belize. Pension funds used as collateral. Fabricated liabilities to justify the low valuation. Sevens. Dorian's face flushed crimson. You had no right to dig through private records. Sevens. Those records belong to the company, I said. To every employee who trusted you. To every family who counted on their retirement being safe. Langston built this company on honesty. Dorian, you turned it into your personal casino. Sevens. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the boardroom. You think you can embarrass me in front of the board? You'll destroy everything Dad created. Sevens. No, I replied evenly. You already did that. I'm here to rebuild it. Sevens. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who followed Langston around the workshop with wide eyes, who believed the world could be built from blueprints and faith. But then it vanished, replaced by the man who thought deception was a strategy. Eleanor West entered then, elegant in her navy suit, the deciding vote on any board dispute. She froze as she took in the scene. "What's going on here?" "Sevens," Reggie answered smoothly. "A clarification of ownership. Mrs. Caldwell is now chairwoman of Caldwell Aerosystems through Monarch Crest Holdings. The board should hear the evidence before any further decisions." "Sevens." Eleanor's sharp eyes scanned the room, then fixed on Dorian. "Is there truth to these allegations?" "Sevens." Dorian hesitated too long. That silence was all the confirmation she needed. She turned to me. "Proceed, Mrs. Caldwell." "Sevens." I stood, pressing my palms to the table. "Effective immediately, I'm reinstating financial integrity audits, restoring the employee pension fund, and implementing an employee stock program. 30% equity distributed among long-term staff." "Sevens." Greer whispered something under his breath. Colton's pen slipped from his hand. Dorian looked around, realizing the power he'd wielded so confidently was gone, redistributed, dissolved. He laughed once, bitterly. "You've planned this for months." "Sevens." "Yes," I said. "Ever since your father warned me that something wasn't right." I leaned closer, voice lowering to a razor's whisper. "He died believing you'd lost your way. I'm giving you a chance to find it again, if you're wise enough to take it." "Sevens." The room was electric. Anger, shock, disbelief. But beneath it all was silence, the kind that follows an earthquake. Dorian straightened his tie, trying to rebuild his mask. "You'll regret this, Mother." "Sevens." I looked at him, the son I'd raised and the man I barely recognized. "No, Dorian," I said softly. "You will." "Sevens." Eleanor West called the room to order again, her tone crisp as glass. The shock had ebbed into a tense, humming silence. Dorian sat rigid, jaw set, while Reggie connected a flash drive to the boardroom screen. The lights dimmed, the projector flickered, and Malik Turner's voice filled the space through the speaker system. "Good morning, everyone. What you're seeing are the internal logs from this week's network activity. Each highlighted line represents data transferred from our proprietary server to an off-site domain registered under Caldwell Strategic Assets, LLC. Malik's calm professionalism made every word cut deeper. That LLC, as our investigation confirmed, is owned solely by Dorian Caldwell." "Sevens." The first file list appeared on screen. Aircraft design schematics, patent blueprints, prototype algorithms. The lifeblood of Caldwell Aerosystems, stolen piece by piece, under my son's authorization. A low murmur rippled through the board members. Dorian rose, trying to mask the panic rising beneath his practiced composure. "That data migration was part of a backup protocol," he argued. "You don't understand the technical." "Sevens." "Enough," Eleanor snapped. "You told this board last quarter that all intellectual property was secured in-house. Were you lying then, or now?" "Sevens." Dorian's mouth opened, closed, then hardened into a tight line. Reggie advanced the next slide. Screenshots of email chains between Dorian and a secondary account under a false name. Marcus Dean. The messages negotiated sale percentages, referencing undisclosed tech assets and independent licensing rights. "Sevens." "This is fabrication," Dorian said, voice rising. "Someone's trying to frame me." "Sevens." "Frame you?" I cut in, stepping forward. "Dorian, these emails were pulled from your personal device. which you sync to the company server yourself. You didn't even bother to cover your tracks. You thought no one would ever challenge you, least of all me. Sevens. For the first time, he faltered. His confidence, that armor of arrogance, cracked just enough for fear to seep through. "You're ruining me," he whispered. "No, Dorian," I said quietly. "You did that when you chose greed over legacy." Sevens. The projection switched to a spreadsheet. The employee pension fund. The red lines told their own story. Tubos. $3 million diverted, disguised as research expenditures. I looked around the table, seeing disbelief turn to fury on faces that had once trusted my son. Greer slammed his folder shut. "If this is accurate, we're talking criminal liability." Sevens. Reggie straightened. "It is accurate. And Mrs. Caldwell has already filed a protective order, securing all company assets under her ownership through Monarch Crest Holdings. Nothing leaves this building without her signature." Sevens. Eleanor turned to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, what are your recommendations for next steps?" Sevens. I took a breath, feeling Langston's presence steadying me. "We restore what was lost. Rebuild what was broken. Every employee gets back what they earned. Every stolen cent is returned." Sevens. Dorian's laugh was harsh, desperate. "You think you can fix this with grand speeches and moral lessons. The world doesn't work that way anymore, Mother. You don't understand modern business." Sevens. I met his eyes. "Then maybe it's time the modern world relearned decency." Sevens. The room fell utterly still. Dorian's gaze darted from face to face, searching for an ally, but all he found was distance. Malik entered then, standing beside me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "the engineering department stands with you. We'll keep production steady through the transition." Sevens. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Gratitude mixed with grief, pride with pain. This was what Langston had meant when he said the company was more than metal and math. It was people. Dorian, cornered, dropped back into his chair, head bowed, tie askew. The silence around him was deafening, the kind that swallows excuses whole. I looked at my son, no longer the clever boy with bright dreams, but a man lost in the consequences he'd written himself. "You wanted to lead, Dorian," I said softly. "Now watch what real leadership looks like." Sevens. When the meeting reconvened after a brief recess, the tension in the boardroom had curdled into something heavy and inescapable. The evidence lay on the table, hard, undeniable, and with it, the future of everyone in that room. Dorian sat at the far end, staring into the polished surface, as though he might find a reflection he still recognized. The board members filed back into their seats in silence, each carrying the weight of what they had just witnessed. Eleanor West took her place at the head of the table and cleared her throat.
"After reviewing the documents and the audit materials presented by Mrs. Caldwell and her counsel, this board acknowledges Monarch Crest Holdings as the legal owner of Caldwell Aerosystems."
She paused, her eyes cutting toward Dorian. "Furthermore, the board recommends immediate disciplinary action pending legal review." Sevens. I didn't need applause or vindication. I just needed to breathe, without that ache of betrayal pressing into my ribs. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, standing. "Effective immediately, I'll be assuming the role of chairwoman Mr. Turner, I nodded to Malik, will act as interim CEO to stabilize operations. We will reinstate the pension fund, dissolve all shell subsidiaries, and begin rebuilding employee trust. The company's integrity returns today. Sevens. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, cautious but hopeful. Across the table, Dorian lifted his head. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but sharp as glass. You think this makes you a hero. You've just humiliated your own son in front of the people who used to answer to me. Sevens. I turned toward him slowly. No, Dorian, I didn't humiliate you. The truth did. Sevens. He pushed his chair back, anger flickering like a struck match. You'll regret this. You think I won't fight you? You think I'll just let you take everything? Sevens. Reggie rose from his seat before I could respond. You already did take everything, Mr. Caldwell. You just didn't realize who you were stealing from. Sevens. Dorian glared at him, then at me, but the fire in his eyes was fading, replaced by the dull exhaustion of a man who'd finally run out of lies to tell. He looked around the room, searching for loyalty and finding none. Even Greer and Colton wouldn't meet his gaze. The silence that followed was worse than any accusation. It was judgment, cold and final. Eleanor closed her folder with a decisive snap. Meeting adjourned. Sevens. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the room as people filed out. Reggie gathered the documents. Malik clasped my shoulder briefly, and then I was alone with Dorian. He stood by the window, his reflection fractured by sunlight on glass. For a moment, I saw the boy again, the one who'd used to stand there with Langston, dreaming about flight. You always said I was your legacy, he murmured without turning. You still could be, I answered softly. But legacy isn't inherited, Dorian. It's earned. Sevens. He didn't reply, just stared at the city below, hands clenched, pride unraveling in slow motion. I left him there, the skyline burning behind him like a reckoning. That Monday morning, before sunrise, I saw his car pull into the employee parking lot for the first time in his life. Not the executive garage, but the lot reserved for the factory floor. Monday morning came heavy, with the scent of machine oil and new beginnings. The sun had barely risen over California City when I spotted Dorian's silver sedan in the far corner of the employee lot, parked awkwardly between a pickup with a dented fender and a compact car coated in dust. The sight hit me harder than I expected. My son, who used to measure success by the gloss of his shoes and the view from his office, was now just another worker punching in before dawn. Inside the production wing, the world was different. No boardroom polish, no tailored silence, just the constant hum of machines and the rhythm of purpose. Earl Jefferson, the plant supervisor, waited by the time clock with a clipboard in one hand and a coffee thermos in the other. Mr. Caldwell, he greeted, his tone polite but neutral. You'll start on Assembly Shift B. Training rotation under Ruth Ann Baptiste. Sevens. Dorian gave a curt nod, his pride already straining beneath the fluorescent lights. Understood. He signed in, the mechanical click of the time card echoing through the hall like a verdict. I watched from the mezzanine above, hidden behind tinted glass. Every worker moved with quiet precision, sleeves rolled, safety goggles on, bodies swaying to the tempo of industry. And there he was, My son, out of place in his crisp coveralls, trying not to flinch as a foreman handed him gloves, still warm from another man's shift. Earl clapped him once on the shoulder. Down here, titles don't build engines. Hands do. Sevens. For a moment, Dorian just stood there, taking in the noise, the smell, the reality. No assistance, no conference calls, no power suits to hide behind. Just labor, honest and relentless. Watching him, I felt something shift. This wasn't punishment. This was education, the kind Langston had always believed in. The production floor was the truest classroom he ever built. From my vantage point, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for Dorian's success, but for his understanding. Because if he could learn humility here, among the same people he once saw as invisible, there might still be a way back. For him, for us, and for the legacy we both carried. Ruth Ann Baptiste had a reputation that ran through the plant like a current. Sharp eyes, sharper standards. She'd been with Caldwell Arrow since its second year, hand-picked by Langston himself when she was barely 20. The rumor was, she could spot a misaligned bolt just by listening to how it clicked into place. When I told Earl to assign her as Dorian's trainer, he'd raised a brow. She doesn't coddle, he warned. Good, I said. Neither do I. Sevens. When Dorian arrived at her workstation, Ruth Ann didn't even look up from the delicate gyroscopic assembly she was calibrating. You're 3 minutes early, she said flatly. That's better than being late. Don't make a habit of either. She finally turned, dark curls streaked with silver escaping from her bandana, gaze steady and unimpressed. Grab a stool. Watch first. Talk later. Sevens. He obeyed, to his credit. For an hour, he watched her hands move. Sure, graceful, unhurried. Every adjustment had purpose, every motion precision born of repetition. When he finally asked a question, it wasn't about the part, it was about her. You worked with my father? Sevens. Worked for him, she corrected. He earned my respect by showing up here once a month, rolling up his sleeves, and reminding us why this place mattered. He could build these components faster than anyone, and he never acted like he was above us. Can you say the same? Sevens. Dorian's silence was answer enough. Ruth Ann handed him a torque wrench. Let's find out. Calibrate this to 18.5 Newton meters. No more, no less. He tried, hands slightly unsure. The wrench clicked too soon. 17, she said without glancing. You're rushing. We don't rush here. We perfect. Sevens. He reset, tried again, slower this time. The click landed clean. Ruth Ann gave a brief nod. Closer. Keep at it. Sevens. Watching from the observation deck, I recognized something flicker in him. A faint humility. A shadow of who he might still become. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was the first true movement toward it. One careful turn of a wrench at a time. By the end of the first week, the factory had learned what to make of Dorian Caldwell. Some called him the suit. Others, the boss's boy. Most just ignored him, assuming he wouldn't last long once the blisters set in. But on the 5th day, during the mid-afternoon shift, something unexpected happened. The assembly line had stalled. A faulty alignment in one of the stabilizer components had thrown off the entire batch. 40 units, precision welded but slightly off balance. Every lost minute meant a delay in shipment, and every delay meant money. Workers circled the malfunctioning part, murmuring, frustration rising like heat. Ruth Ann barked orders, already on her third inspection. Then, from the back of the group, Dorian spoke up. The torque sequence is reversed. Sevens. The room went still. No one turned, not yet. He moved forward, wiping his hands on his coveralls, and pointed at the diagnostic screen. You're using the wrong sequence code. This batch is from the prototype configuration, not production standard. Ruth Ann frowned, double-checking. He was right. Somehow, he had spotted the flaw faster than her. How'd you catch that? She asked, suspicious and curious all at once. He hesitated, then shrugged. I helped design that code 2 years ago, back when I still remembered why this mattered. Sevens. For a heartbeat. No one spoke. Then Ruth Ann exhaled sharply, turned to the crew, and said, Well, don't just stand there. Fix the damn thing. Sevens. The line roared back to life. Workers moved with renewed urgency, guided by Dorian's correction. It wasn't applause he received, but it was something better. Acknowledgement. Quiet, earned respect. When the machines settled into rhythm again, Ruth Ann gave him a long look. Seems like you remember more than I thought. Sevens. He nodded once, humbled but lit from within. Maybe I just forgot what it felt like to build instead of take. Sevens. From the observation window above, I felt my chest tighten. Pride mixed with pain. Langston's son, our son, was finally learning the value of work the same way his father had. Not by owning the company, but by saving it, one mistake at a time. By Friday afternoon, the air in the factory felt different, charged, alive. Word of Dorian's quick fix had spread through the plant like a whispered rumor, and for the first time, his name wasn't followed by resentment. People were curious. Respect was cautious, but it was there, hovering like a new scent in the air. Even Ruth Ann, notoriously stingy with praise, had started referring to him not as the Caldwell boy, but simply as Dorian. Sevens. That day, he stayed late after everyone clocked out, determined to finish calibrating a test run on the G47 stabilizer, a notoriously temperamental piece of machinery. I watched from the mezzanine, the hum of fluorescent lights casting long shadows over the floor. His movements were slow, deliberate, focused. Sweat rolled down his temple, and for once, he didn't look like an executive stripped of his crown. He looked like a man earning his place. Then a loud crack split the air, a pressure valve bursting. The sharp hiss of escaping steam sent workers rushing back inside. Dorian was nearest the malfunctioning unit. Without hesitation, he grabbed an insulated wrench, twisting the release manually before the pressure could trigger the emergency alarm. The metal burned through his glove, searing his palm. He didn't let go until the system leveled out. Ruth Ann reached him first, pulling his hand into a sink of cold water, cursing under her breath. You could have lost your damn fingers. She scolded. He winced, but managed a half smile. Guess that's what happens when you actually touch the work. Sevens. Later, I found the scorched glove discarded near the valve, a blackened reminder that redemption rarely comes without pain. In that moment, I realized the lesson was landing deeper than I'd dared to hope. Dorian wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He was finally showing up, the way Langston once had, the way real builders always do. 3 weeks later, under the golden sky of California City, The company's annual summer picnic would test whether that transformation was real, or just a story I wanted to believe. Every June, Caldwell Aero Systems hosted its annual summer picnic, a tradition Langston started back when the company could barely afford a grill and 2 folding tables. He always said the picnic wasn't about celebration, it was about gratitude. That first year, he cooked burgers himself and handed out homemade scholarship envelopes to employees' kids, calling it investing in tomorrow. Now, decades later, the event had grown into a full-blown festival at Riverside Park. Live band, food trucks, laughter echoing across the grass. This year, though, the energy carried something heavier underneath the joy, a mix of curiosity and hesitation. People wondered if the Caldwells would both show up. I arrived early, wearing Langston's old sun hat, helping the HR team set up the scholarship table lined with 20 crisp envelopes, each bearing a young student's name. It was the first ceremony since his passing, and the first with me as chairwoman. By noon, families filled the park, kids chasing frisbees while the brass band played old soul tunes. Then, just as I turned to greet a group of retirees, I saw him, Dorian. He stood at the edge of the crowd, sleeves rolled, no suit, no entourage. Just my son, blending into the noise like everyone else. The conversations quieted slightly, a ripple of surprise moving through the employees. He made his way toward me, slow but steady, and for the first time in months, there was no tension in his face, only a cautious humility. "You look good, Mom," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Langston's hat suits you." "Sevens." "Your father wore it better," I replied, smiling faintly. But I couldn't deny the pride threading through my chest as I watched him move through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging small talk, rediscovering a company that had once been his playground and his burden. That day, beneath the wide California sky, I saw the first true glimpse of reconciliation, not in words, but in the simple act of my son showing up. The murmurs spread fast as Dorian moved through the picnic grounds, though this time, they weren't sharpened with scorn. They were laced with curiosity, even a kind of cautious respect. The man who had once commanded from the boardroom now carried paper plates and handed out bottled water to interns. Ruth Ann caught my eye from across the field, smirking. "Told you he'd show up," she mouthed before returning to her group. He stopped near the scholarship tent, where Malik was helping set up the sound system for the award ceremony. "Didn't think you'd make it," Malik said, not unkindly. "Would have been easier to stay home." "Sevens." "Yeah," Dorian answered, "but easier's what got me in trouble in the first place." "Sevens." It was a simple exchange, but it landed like an exhale over the crowd. People began to loosen, approaching him with tentative nods, small jokes. I watched as a few of the assembly workers from his shift waved him over to their table, sliding him a chair. For the first time, he sat among them. No hierarchy, no title. Just another man under the summer sun. When Ruth Ann passed by, she clapped a rough hand on his shoulder. "You remember torque ratios half as well as you remember faces. You'll be fine up there," she teased. He laughed, and the sound startled even him. A genuine laugh, unpolished, human. From where I stood, I realized something subtle but profound had shifted. The factory workers, the engineers, the administrators, they weren't looking at him as a fallen executive anymore. They were seeing him as part of the family again, a man slowly re-earning his place at the table his father built. The band switched to a slow blues tune, the kind Langston used to hum while welding parts in the old garage. I felt my eyes sting, not with grief this time, but with relief. For the first time in a long while, the Caldwells didn't feel divided. The company didn't feel haunted. It felt whole. When the scholarship ceremony began, the laughter quieted into a respectful hush. I stood at the small wooden stage beneath the white canopy, sunlight flickering through the trees. The 20 envelopes rested on the table beside me, each one a bridge between past and future, between Langston's dream and the next generation. Langston Caldwell believed education was the finest tool a person could ever hold, I said, my voice steady, though my throat tightened. He built planes, but he also built people, and he made sure every door he opened stayed open for those who came after. Sevens. As the applause settled, I glanced toward Dorian, standing at the edge of the crowd. For a second, I saw the boy who used to fall asleep on his father's drafting table, smudged with graphite and dreams. One by one, the students came forward. Smiling parents wiped away tears. And then came the last name on the list, Nia Jefferson, daughter of Earl Jefferson, the factory supervisor. She was tall, poised, wearing the same quiet pride her father carried every day on the floor. As she accepted the envelope, she turned to the microphone and said, "My dad always said Mr. Caldwell gave him a job, but Mrs. Caldwell gave him hope. Now, this scholarship gives me both." Sevens. The audience applauded, warm and full. I felt tears press behind my eyes, but before they could fall, Dorian stepped forward unprompted, taking the mic gently. "And your father gave this company loyalty," he said. "My dad would have been proud to see how far that loyalty travels." Sevens. For a moment, the world stilled. No awkwardness, no stagecraft, just truth. People clapped louder this time, not for me, not for Dorian, but for the circle finally closing. Standing there, watching my son hand Nia her scholarship certificate, I realized the legacy Langston left behind wasn't a company or a fortune. It was this: the power to build something worth forgiving for. After the ceremony, the crowd scattered back toward the food trucks and the shaded picnic tables, laughter bubbling like the soundtrack of a life finally back in tune. I lingered near the stage, gathering the leftover envelopes when Dorian approached, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The late afternoon light washed his face in gold and shadow. He looked older somehow, not by years, but by understanding. "That speech," he began softly. "You didn't plan it, did you?" Sevens. I smiled. "Neither did you." Sevens. He chuckled under his breath, the sound tinged with something fragile. "When Nia spoke, He paused, struggling for the right words. "I finally understood what Dad meant when he said we weren't building machines. We were building trust." Sevens. "That's what made him extraordinary," I said. "He cared more about people than profit. Maybe that's what you're learning now." Sevens. He nodded, then looked out toward the employees scattered across the lawn. "I don't know if they'll ever forgive me," he admitted. "They don't need to yet," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a process. Keep showing up. Keep earning it." Sevens. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The brass band played an old gospel tune in the distance. Kids laughed near the ice cream truck. and the air smelled faintly of barbecue and sun. Dorian exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of arrogance he no longer had the strength to carry. When the sun dipped behind the trees, I placed Langston's hat back on my head and turned to him. "Next week, your Level 4 certification test, right?" "Sevens." "Yeah," he said, straightening. "Ruth Ann's not making it easy." "Sevens. She never does. That's why your father trusted her." "Sevens." He smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "Guess I'll see if I can live up to the name this time." "Sevens." That night, long after the park had emptied, I sat alone in Langston's old office at home, waiting for the moment I knew would come. The knock on the door that would change everything once more. It was close to midnight when the knock finally came. Soft, hesitant, the kind that carries the weight of something unspoken. I knew it was Dorian before I even opened the door. He stood there on the porch, still in his factory coveralls, sleeves rolled up, grease smudged on his wrist. The night air smelled of jasmine and rain. For a fleeting moment, I saw Langston in him, not in his face, but in the quiet humility of his stance. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said, voice low. "I just didn't want to end the day without saying thank you." "Sevens." "For what?" I asked gently. "For not giving up on me. For making me face what I did instead of letting me run from it." He looked down, then back up, eyes glinting with something fragile. "Dad would have done the same, wouldn't he?" "Sevens. He would have made you work for forgiveness," I said, smiling softly. "And you're doing that." "Sevens." He nodded, exhaling slowly, as if the words were a release. "When I was on that floor today, fixing that stabilizer, I finally got it. I wasn't just repairing metal. I was repairing what I broke. I don't know if I'll ever make it right, but I'm trying." "Sevens." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the city beyond the gate, and the soft creak of the porch boards beneath us. Then I reached out and rested my hand on his shoulder. "That's all your father ever wanted. For you to understand what it means to build something that lasts." "Sevens." And for the first time since Langston's passing, the silence between us felt like peace, not distance. The next morning, California City woke in a haze of soft light and salt air. From my kitchen window, I could see the sunrise glinting off the factory's distant roof, a beacon of everything we had fought to protect. I poured 2 cups of coffee, the way Langston used to, and carried one to the porch. 10 minutes later, Dorian joined me, still wearing the same weary expression, but something in his posture had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet steadiness. We sat without speaking at first, the kind of silence that only comes after too many hard truths. Then he said, "I've been thinking about Dad, about what kind of man he really was." "Sevens." I smiled faintly. He was the kind of man who believed work was sacred, who treated a factory line like a cathedral. "Sevens." Dorian's fingers tapped against his mug, thoughtful. "He didn't build this company just to make planes, did he?" "Sevens." "No," I said softly. "He built it to prove something bigger, that integrity can still win in a world obsessed with shortcuts." "Sevens." He nodded, gaze distant. "I used to think success was about control, about being the smartest person in the room. But he led by trust." "Sevens." I looked at him, My son, no longer the careless executive who once thought power meant dominance. And that's why people followed him, I said. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Sevens. He turned to me, eyes bright but resolute. I want to earn that kind of respect again, Mom. Not for a title, for who I am. Sevens. In that moment, as the sunlight spilled across the porch and the coffee steam curled between us, I finally saw what Langston had seen all along. The potential for redemption, not as a miracle, but as a choice. Weeks later, life at Caldwell Aero Systems found a new rhythm. Steady, humble, almost healing. The tension that once filled the air had lifted, replaced by something quieter, stronger. The employees laughed again in the break rooms. The production floor hummed like it used to, and even the board members spoke of the future with hope rather than fear. Every morning, Dorian clocked in at 6. 0 A.M. Sharp. He didn't ask for exceptions or favors. He just worked. Some days, I'd stop by unannounced and watch him from the observation deck. His sleeves rolled, his movements steady, his focus absolute. The man who once built numbers now built parts. And in each motion, I saw something his father would have recognized. Respect for the craft, for the people, for the weight of what his choices had nearly destroyed. One afternoon, Ruth Ann stopped by my office with her usual briskness. "He's doing good work," she said, leaning against the doorway. "Still too proud, but that's fading. Give him time." Sevens. I smiled. That's all I ever wanted to give him. Time. Sevens. Later that evening, Dorian dropped by my home with a small box of old photos he'd found in storage. Pictures of Langston in grease-stained gloves, me in my early days beside him, both of us younger, foolish, determined. We sat on the floor, flipping through decades of memory, laughter mixing with silence. Looking at those photos, I thought about forgiveness, the kind that doesn't erase pain, but transforms it. I wondered how many parents, how many children, never get that second chance. And I couldn't help but ask you, watching this, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have chosen to fight for redemption instead of revenge? Time has a quiet way of mending what pride once broke. Months after that long, painful reckoning, the Caldwell name meant something again. Not because of money or power, but because of trust. The company was thriving under Malik's leadership. The employees had ownership shares for the first time, and the factory walls that once echoed with tension now carried laughter and purpose. As for Dorian, he never returned to the boardroom. He didn't need to. He found his place where his father once stood, on the floor, hands steady, eyes focused, teaching new hires the same lessons he'd once ignored. Sometimes, when I passed by, I'd hear him quote Langston without realizing it. "We don't just build machines here. We build people who believe in what they make." That was when I knew redemption had finally taken root. Sitting in my garden one evening, the sunset spilling amber light across the roses Langston planted years ago, I realized the true heart of this story. It was never about revenge or even justice. It was about grace, about choosing to rebuild rather than destroy. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't weakness. It's strength, wearing gentleness. If you were in my place, would you have found it in your heart to forgive? Would you have trusted that people, no matter how lost, can find their way back if given the chance? If this story touched you, If you believe second chances can change a life, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about family, resilience, and the quiet power of love that rebuilds what was once broken.